They didn't raise their voices. They didn't rush the announcement. And that's exactly why it felt terrifying. Because when the palace speaks softly, history is already moving. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Ask yourself this. When was the last time Buckingham Palace used the words heartbreaking news without immediately cushioning them with reassurance? When was the last time they allowed uncertainty to sit in the air, unanswered, unresolved, heavy? This wasn't panic. This wasn't chaos. This was preparation. And preparation is what the monarchy does when the clock is no longer theoretical. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people are only just beginning to sense. The story unfolding right now isn't really about illness. It isn't even about King Charles alone. It's about succession, control, and a decision that may have been finalized long before the public realized it was even being discussed. Because while the palace confirmed heartbreaking news about the king's condition, something else happened almost simultaneously. Something quieter, something far more revealing. The future was named, and one name was noticeably absent. Why now? Why this wording? Why would Princess Anne, of all people, step into the conversation at this exact moment? These are not coincidences. They are signals, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Let's slow this down. Because the monarchy thrives on pace. It knows when to accelerate and when to stall. Right now, it's doing both at the same time. The public is being asked to pause, to reflect, to feel sympathy. But behind the velvet curtain, gears are turning fast. Too fast for comfort. King Charles waited longer than any monarch in modern history to wear the crown. More than 7 decades preparing for a role defined by patience, discipline, and endurance. When he finally ascended, the narrative was clear. This was his moment. His time to modernize, to soften, to redefine what a king could be in the 21st century. But history is rarely sentimental, and biology doesn't respect symbolism. When the palace confirmed the news about his condition, they didn't tell us everything. In fact, they told us very little. But what they chose to say matters more than what they withheld. Palace language is never accidental. Every word is weighed. Every phrase is tested against precedent, against reaction, against risk. And the phrase they used carried weight. Heartbreaking, not manageable, not temporary, not under observation. Heartbreaking. That word doesn't describe a setback. It describes an ending. Now, that doesn't mean the end is immediate. The monarchy doesn't work on hours or days. It works on phases. But when a phase begins, everything aligns around it, including succession. Here's the part most people misunderstand. Succession planning doesn't begin when a monarch dies. It doesn't even begin when illness becomes public. It begins when probability shifts. And probability, right now, has shifted. This is why Prince William's presence has subtly increased. More meetings, more visibility, more weight in his words. He isn't stepping forward dramatically. He's being placed carefully, methodically, like a chess piece moving toward an inevitable square. And then there's Prince Harry, or rather, the absence of him. In moments like these, families often rally. Appearances are coordinated. Unity is emphasized. Even strained relationships are papered over for the sake of optics. The monarchy has done this countless times before, but this time feels different. Because unity wasn't emphasized. Silence was. And silence can be louder than exclusion. The idea that Prince Harry might one day become king has always existed technically, on paper, as a distant possibility. But possibilities are only useful if institutions trust the people attached to them. And trust, once fractured, is rarely repaired inside systems built on continuity. This isn't about popularity. It's not about who the public likes more. The monarchy doesn't run on sentiment. It runs on predictability. And predictability is the one thing Harry no longer represents to the institution. That doesn't make him wrong. It doesn't make him cruel. It doesn't make him disloyal as a son. But it does make him unsuitable in the eyes of a system that fears uncertainty more than it fears controversy. Which brings us to Princess Anne. If you're looking for drama, you don't look to Anne. She doesn't grandstand. She doesn't posture. She doesn't leak. She has built her reputation on something far more dangerous in royal circles, blunt truth, and has always been the adult in the room. The royal who understands that the crown is not a family heirloom, but a responsibility passed through blood whether the bloodline likes it or not. When she speaks, it isn't emotional. It's structural. And what she revealed, directly or indirectly, was not shocking because it was cruel. It was shocking because it was final. The next king will be William. Not someday. Not hypothetically. Not as a backup. William. That statement does something subtle but profound. It closes doors. It removes ambiguity. It tells governments, institutions, and allies that continuity is secured. And in doing so, it quietly removes Harry from the equation entirely. For some, this feels like betrayal. For others, it feels like inevitability. For the palace, it feels like survival. But let's be honest with each other for a moment. Was this ever going to end differently? Prince William never left. He didn't step away to find himself. He didn't challenge the institution publicly. He absorbed criticism, pressure, and expectation in silence. That silence wasn't weakness. It was currency. The monarchy rewards endurance. Harry chose honesty. William chose stability. And when an institution feels threatened, it chooses stability every time. This is why the palace's announcement matters. Not because it tells us everything, but because it tells us enough. Enough to know that the monarchy is bracing. Enough to know that conversations once considered premature are now unavoidable. Enough to know that someone, somewhere inside those walls, has already asked the hardest question of all. What happens next? Because once that question is asked, there is no going back. The public may still be processing the news. The headlines may still hedge. But the machine has shifted. The crown doesn't wait for permission. It doesn't wait for consensus. It moves when it must. And right now, it's moving. So as we continue this story, keep this in mind. What you're about to hear isn't a sudden decision made in response to illness. It's the result of years of positioning, trust building, fractures, and choices that seemed personal at the time, but were always institutional in consequence. This isn't about who deserves the crown. It's about who the crown believes it can survive with. And in the next section, we're going to break down the exact moment the palace's language shifted from reassurance to readiness. The words, the timing, and the signals most people missed. Because once you see how carefully this message was constructed, you'll understand something chilling. This outcome didn't begin with an illness. It began long before anyone was supposed to notice. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The palace didn't panic. And that, more than anything else, is what set alarm bells ringing. Because panic is loud. Panic leaks. Panic contradicts itself. What we saw instead was restraint. Precision. A statement that looked calm on the surface, but felt heavy the moment you read it twice. Let me ask you something. Have you ever received bad news delivered too carefully? Not rushed. Not emotional. Just controlled. The kind of message that feels rehearsed because it has been rehearsed. Not for days. Not for weeks. But for years. That's what this was. The words came out measured, dignified, almost gentle. But buried inside them was a shift, so subtle, most people missed it entirely. And yet that shift told us everything we needed to know. Because Buckingham Palace has a language of its own. A dialect shaped by centuries of crisis. Wars. Abdications. Scandals. Deaths. And when you understand that language, you start to hear what isn't being said just as clearly as what is. The statement confirmed heartbreaking news regarding King Charles's condition. Pause there. Heartbreaking. That word doesn't appear casually in royal communications. It isn't chosen to generate sympathy. It isn't used to soften bad headlines. It's used when something irreversible has entered the conversation. Heartbreaking suggests grief is expected. Not panic. Not shock. Grief. And grief implies preparation. Now here's the contradiction that should have stopped everyone in their tracks. At the very same moment the palace was asking the public to focus on compassion, sympathy, and patience, it was also doing something else entirely behind closed doors. It was clarifying the future. Those two things don't usually happen at the same time. Historically, when a monarch faces health concerns, the palace leans hard into reassurance. We've seen it before. Carefully chosen phrases. Emphasis on continuity of duties. Updates that suggest recovery, resilience, management. But this time, reassurance took a back seat to gravity. Why? Because reassurance is only useful when uncertainty benefits you. And uncertainty, right now, does not. The palace isn't just a family residence. It's a signaling machine. Every message is designed not just for the public, but for governments, Commonwealth nations, financial markets, and global allies. Stability matters. Predictability matters even more. And unpredictability is the one thing institutions fear above all else. So when the wording shifted, insiders noticed immediately. Analysts noticed. Veteran royal correspondents noticed. The kind of people who've spent decades reading between these lines noticed. And what they saw wasn't fear. It was readiness. Think about that. If this were a temporary issue, if this were a moment meant to pass quietly, the palace would have slowed the narrative, bought time, dampened speculation. Instead, they allowed a vacuum to exist. And vacuums get filled. Almost immediately, attention moved away from the king's health and toward the structure around him. Who's stepping in? Who's visible? Who's suddenly essential? And who isn't? Prince William didn't announce anything dramatic. He didn't make a speech. He didn't demand attention. He simply appeared. More often. More confidently. More centrally. That's not coincidence. That's choreography. But here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because choreography only works when everyone knows their role. And one role, conspicuously, seemed to have been written out entirely. Prince Harry's name didn't appear. Not as reassurance. Not as support. Not even as symbolic unity. Nothing. In previous moments of royal tension, the palace has gone out of its way to project togetherness. Even strained relationships were staged side by side for the sake of continuity. The message was always the same. Whatever our private differences, the institution comes first. This time, the message changed. Silence replaced symbolism. And silence, in the monarchy, is rarely accidental. Now let's talk about Princess Anne. Because her presence in this conversation is the biggest tell of all, and does not operate emotionally. She doesn't perform empathy for cameras. She doesn't engage in narrative softening. Her loyalty is not to public opinion. It's to the crown as a functioning entity. That's why she's trusted. And when someone like Anne speaks, it isn't about comfort. It's about clarity. Her involvement signaled something critical. The conversation had moved from concern to contingency, from sympathy to succession. Because Anne is not brought in to speculate. She's brought in when decisions are already crystallizing. And what was revealed through her was not a debate. It wasn't a discussion. It was a declaration. The next king will be William. Full stop. No qualifiers. No emotional framing. No acknowledgement of alternative paths. That kind of certainty doesn't emerge overnight. It's the result of long evaluation, of trust measured over years, not moments, of observing who stays, who adapts, and who destabilizes the system by simply refusing to play by its rules. This is where people get uncomfortable, because the story they want is a moral one, a story about fairness, about love, about redemption, about second chances. But the monarchy doesn't operate on morality. It operates on survivability. And survivability demands one thing above all else: predictability. Prince William has made himself predictable in the best possible way. He shows up. He stays quiet when needed. He absorbs pressure without reacting publicly. He understands that the role is larger than the person inhabiting it. Prince Harry chose a different path. A path that prioritized truth, healing, and personal autonomy. Those things are not wrong, but they are incompatible with an institution that measures success in centuries, not years. That incompatibility is what finally became unavoidable when King Charles's condition shifted from private concern to public reality. Because illness forces clarity. It accelerates decisions that were previously theoretical. It removes the luxury of ambiguity. And it exposes fault lines that can no longer be ignored. That's why the palace didn't panic. It didn't need to. The decisions had already been made. What we're seeing now isn't the beginning of a conversation. It's the controlled release of an outcome. And here's the part that should give you chills. When institutions like the monarchy reach this stage, they aren't reacting. They're executing. Every appearance, every absence, every word, every pause, all of it is intentional. Which means the public narrative is always a few steps behind the internal reality. So while the world focuses on headlines about health, compassion, and uncertainty, the structure of the future is quietly locking into place. And that raises a question far more unsettling than any medical update. If this decision is already settled, what else is being prepared? Because once succession clarity emerges this early, it usually means something else is coming. Something that requires the public to already be conditioned to change. And in the next section, We're going to break down exactly why King Charles's reign, despite its symbolic importance, may have always been viewed internally as transitional rather than enduring. Because when you understand how the palace truly viewed his time on the throne, you'll realize just how long this moment has been approaching. But what came next would reframe everything we thought we knew about power, patience, and the cost of waiting. And no one was ready for it. King Charles waited a lifetime for this. Over 7 decades of preparation, observation, and patient endurance. From the moment he first set foot in the public eye as a boy, he was groomed, scrutinized, and instructed on the weight of the crown. Every speech, every public engagement, every handshake, every charitable effort was calculated not just for appearance, but for training, an unrelenting rehearsal for a role that is impossible to step into without every ounce of discipline. But here's the bitter truth. Waiting so long doesn't guarantee you longevity once you finally ascend. The monarchy, unlike ordinary life, measures not in years, but in the symbolism of continuity. And when Charles finally became king, the world applauded his patience. The public narrative painted him as the man who had waited decades for justice, for recognition, for purpose. But private reality is rarely so neat. The weight of expectation has always been heavier than any crown. Every king before him navigated the delicate dance between public perception and private endurance. For Charles, the task was multiplied exponentially. History had long questioned his role, scrutinized his decisions, and highlighted every personal misstep. The monarchy is an institution that prizes longevity and restraint. It punishes impulsiveness and rewards calculated, measured actions. In public, he had the perfect veneer of composure. But behind closed doors, even kings are human. Long-awaited ascension doesn't erase the pressures that come with decades of observation. The moment you inherit responsibility, every decision becomes historical. Every misstep, no matter how private, is magnified. This brings us back to the recent heartbreaking news. The palace's words were carefully chosen, but they were not empty. Heartbreaking is not a term they apply lightly. They reserve it for moments when grief, inevitability, or irreversible change has entered the room. And while the public may see only the word and the image of a dignified king, insiders know the deeper reality. The moment of transition isn't hypothetical anymore. The machinery of succession is already moving, quietly and methodically, under layers of ceremony and control. Succession isn't emotional. It isn't sentimental. It doesn't bend for personal circumstance. It moves when probability shifts. And the probability, now, has clearly shifted. The signs are subtle but unmistakable. The king's appearances are carefully staged, more public engagements, more opportunities for William to stand visibly by his side, less room for ambiguity. Prince William, the heir who never left, has long been seen as the embodiment of continuity. He absorbed criticism with stoic patience, learned the craft of diplomacy, and maintained a carefully measured presence. He represents reliability in a system that cannot tolerate unpredictability. Every public smile, every gesture, every word is calibrated to signal stability. The crown rewards such endurance. Prince Harry, by contrast, represents the unknown. His choices to step away, to speak openly, to challenge certain narratives, made him unpredictable to the institution. Loyalty is not measured in sentiment, but in predictability and adherence to duty. Harry's honesty, while morally defensible, created a tension the monarchy cannot accommodate when continuity is at stake. And this is where Princess Anne enters the frame, and is not a figure of drama or media manipulation. She is the trusted voice of clarity within a family bound by centuries of obligation. Her reputation is unassailable because she has consistently chosen duty over emotion, fact over speculation, and institution over sentiment. When Anne speaks, the palace listens. Her words carry authority because they reflect the internal reality of the monarchy, not a desire to sway public opinion. Through Anne's subtle involvement, the internal message became clear. The next king is William. Not someday. Not hypothetically. William. No qualifiers. No hedging. That declaration shifts the public narrative in a way that is invisible to most observers, but devastating in its implications. It confirms a reality already decided behind closed doors. Harry is no longer part of the equation. Now consider the implications. William embodies predictability, continuity, and calm authority. He has demonstrated resilience, discretion, and the capacity to absorb pressure without disrupting the institution. The monarchy's survival depends on these traits. Meanwhile, Harry's departure from the center stage, his pursuit of independence, and his vocal challenges represent uncertainty, and the crown cannot tolerate that risk. This isn't about morality, fairness, or popularity. The monarchy operates on survivability, and survivability demands the removal of uncertainty wherever possible. In this light, the palace's language, the timing of Princess Anne's involvement, and the increased visibility of William all make perfect sense. The institution is not reacting to a sudden event. It is executing a carefully orchestrated plan that has been years in the making. But here's the haunting part. For the public, this looks like a story of health, sympathy, and inevitability. For insiders, it is a story of preparation, positioning, and control. Every appearance, every absence, every carefully chosen phrase is a deliberate signal. The narrative the public consumes is always several steps behind the decisions that shape reality. And yet, while the machinery of succession has begun to move with precision, there is still one human element that complicates everything: emotion. Because the monarchy, despite its centuries of rules, is still made of humans. Fathers, sons, siblings, cousins, people who have loved, lost, and navigated conflict in private spaces that history will never record. The tension between institutional necessity and personal feeling is at its peak. Charles, who has waited decades to wield authority, now faces the dual reality of his own mortality and the inevitability of succession. William, trained for this moment his entire life, steps into a role he has rehearsed for but never wanted to rush. Harry, navigating his own path, remains a reminder that human desires often collide violently with systemic imperatives. All of these threads converge in one inescapable truth. The monarchy is preparing for change, and the public has barely begun to process it. Every carefully orchestrated statement, every subtle shift in visibility, every whispered consultation behind palace doors is part of a choreography designed to maintain continuity. And yet, for all the precision, uncertainty still lingers in the margins. Because in a family as public as this one, where private pain and public duty intertwine, certainty always carries a cost. And that cost is about to be revealed. The next chapter will examine the specific ways King Charles's reign, despite its symbolic weight, has been viewed internally as transitional from the start. We'll see how decades of preparation, trust, and scrutiny created a scenario where the machinery of succession was always moving, whether anyone noticed or not. But what comes next isn't just history repeating itself. It's a confrontation between loyalty, love, and the unyielding requirements of survival. And it will redefine everything about what we thought we knew about the crown. The palace didn't raise its voice. There were no urgent press conferences, no dramatic announcements with flashing cameras. And that is precisely why everyone should have paid attention. Because when Buckingham Palace speaks quietly, it is usually when the stakes are highest. Ask yourself this. When was the last time you heard the words "heartbreaking news" come from the palace and felt a chill run down your spine? Not because it was dramatic, not because it was sensationalized, but because it was precise, intentional, calculated. Every syllable weighed, every phrase tested against history, public reaction, and institutional stability. The announcement regarding King Charles's condition was, on the surface, calm, polished, respectful. But beneath that veneer, there was a current of tension that only the most attentive could sense. And the reason it was chilling is simple. Buckingham Palace doesn't use language carelessly. The words "heartbreaking news" are reserved for events that are both inevitable and irreversible. They are signals to the public, the government, the Commonwealth, and, crucially, the family itself. When you begin to analyze the phrasing, the choices, and the timing, it becomes clear that this was more than a health update. This was a statement of transition. A quiet declaration that things had shifted internally, that decisions were being finalized, and that the machinery of succession had begun to move, whether the public understood it or not. And yet, in that moment, a subtle contradiction emerged. The palace wanted the world to be sympathetic, to pause, reflect, and feel compassion. But simultaneously, they were setting the stage for a different kind of narrative, one that was already decided, one that left little room for debate. It was subtle, almost invisible to the casual observer, but it was there. Think about that for a moment. Publicly, the focus was on King Charles, his health, and the emotional weight of the news. Privately, conversations about succession were accelerating. Doors that were always open in theory were quietly closing. Names were being placed where they would matter most. And one name, conspicuously, was being excluded. Prince William's presence increased almost immediately after the announcement. No speeches, no grand gestures, just subtle positioning. Appearances, meetings, public engagements, carefully curated moments that signaled readiness, stability, and continuity. He did not step forward dramatically. He did not make noise. He simply was present in a way that reassured the institution. Contrast that with Prince Harry. His absence, both in public and in the narrative, was glaring. Not out of oversight, not out of accident. This was a deliberate omission. Historically, the palace emphasizes family unity in moments of crisis, even if it is only superficial. Photos side by side, coordinated statements, public shows of solidarity. This time, none of that appeared. Silence replaced the expected unity. And silence, especially in the monarchy, is louder than words. It signals absence, exclusion, and, ultimately, a shift in trust. The crown has always been about continuity above all else. Public affection, loyalty, or sentimentality matters less than reliability, predictability, and adherence to the institution's unspoken rules. Now, let's bring Princess Anne into the picture. Anne is not the figure of spectacle. She does not make dramatic pronouncements or seek media attention. She operates on precision, loyalty, and the unwavering understanding of how the monarchy functions. Her words carry weight precisely because she is trusted to tell the truth within the boundaries of discretion. When Anne speaks, the palace listens. And that is exactly what happened here. Behind the carefully curated public message, Princess Anne's role was to signal clarity internally. Her presence marked a moment where ambiguity could no longer be tolerated. And what she communicated, directly or indirectly, was definitive. The next king will be William. Not someday. Not hypothetically. Not if circumstances change. William. Full stop. The implications of this are enormous. William embodies predictability, discipline, and calm authority, qualities the monarchy prizes above all. He absorbs pressure without reaction, maintains composure, and provides stability. His predictability makes him indispensable to the institution's survival. Harry, by contrast, represents uncertainty. His public statements, independent choices, and refusal to remain confined within traditional expectations render him incompatible with the demands of continuity. This is not about who deserves the crown. It is not about fairness, love, or even loyalty. The monarchy functions on survivability. It rewards endurance. It punishes unpredictability. And in this moment, the palace had made its choice. Yet, despite this clarity within the institution, the public narrative is designed to lag behind. The carefully orchestrated appearances, absences, and language create a perception of calm, sympathy, and inevitability. The truth is far more intricate, layered, and strategic. Every photo, every statement, every public engagement is calculated to reassure without revealing the full extent of internal planning. But the human element cannot be ignored. Charles, after decades of preparation, now faces the reality of his own mortality and the weight of impending transition. William, trained for this moment his entire life, steps quietly into readiness. Harry, navigating his own path, embodies the tension between individual choice and systemic expectation. And, ever vigilant, ensures that the institution remains anchored even amid emotional and political complexity. These threads converge to create a narrative that is both inevitable and fragile. The institution is moving with precision, yet the human stakes are enormous. Fathers, sons, siblings. Relationships forged over decades are entangled with the crown's demands. Decisions that may appear cold or calculated are intertwined with deep personal history. The result is a tension so profound that every public statement, no matter how calm, carries layers of meaning. Each word is a signal, each pause a message, each omission a deliberate choice. And while the public debates the king's condition, the institution moves decisively to ensure continuity. The next chapter will examine Prince William in depth, how he has been quietly positioned as the ultimate heir, the embodiment of predictability and stability, and why his rise is as inevitable as it is meticulously orchestrated. We'll analyze the signals, the public appearances, and the internal trust building that set the stage for this moment, showing exactly how one man became indispensable to the crown's survival. But what comes next will reveal the consequences for those left out. The human costs of continuity, loyalty, and the unyielding requirements of survival. He waited over 70 years for this. Every public appearance, every carefully curated speech, every handshake, every photograph, every charitable engagement, all were part of decades-long preparation. Charles didn't just grow up in the shadow of the crown. He was trained, scrutinized, and molded by it. He became a student of duty, a scholar of protocol, and a master of patience. And yet, after all those years, the irony is cruel. Waiting does not guarantee time. From the moment he was born, Charles's life was defined by expectation. He learned early that a misstep could haunt him for decades, that every action would be compared against his father's legacy, his mother's popularity, and the idealized notion of what a king should be. Childhood, adolescence, even adulthood, all were measured, observed, recorded. There was no space for impulsivity, no room for mistakes. Every decision, every behavior, was a lesson in restraint. Yet life, of course, is unpredictable, and while Charles was waiting patiently, the world did not pause. Scandals erupted, media scrutiny intensified, and public opinion shifted. Diana's life and tragic death created an emotional and symbolic shadow over him that no amount of preparation could erase. And through it all, he waited. Decades of waiting. And then, finally, the crown. But as the news of his condition has reminded the world, waiting does not equal longevity. Even as he ascended to the throne, time was not necessarily on his side. Monarchs are symbols, yes, but they are also human. Mortality does not pause for symbolism, nor does biology defer to expectation. And the palace's carefully measured words, heartbreaking news, remind us that Charles's reign, however momentous, may already be measured in months or a few short years, rather than decades of influence he had always imagined. The weight of expectation did not end when he became king. In fact, it intensified. Charles is the culmination of a lineage that stretches back centuries. Every decision, every public appearance, every engagement reflects not only his personal choices, but the values of the institution. One misstep, one moment of visible weakness, could reverberate across the Commonwealth and destabilize centuries of tradition. This is a reality no other career could have prepared him for. The irony is almost tragic. After decades of careful preparation, after building a lifetime of credibility and restraint, Charles may not have the time to fully realize the vision he has held for his reign. Reforms delayed, modernization unfinished, personal agendas unfulfilled. All because the clock of biology waits for no one, not even a king who has waited a lifetime. And yet, while the world sees only the ceremonial aspects, the pageantry, the speeches, the polite appearances, the inner workings tell a different story. The monarchy is not a democracy. It does not operate by debate, negotiation, or consent in the usual sense. Decisions are often made quietly, internally, with an emphasis on continuity, stability, and trust. And when the institution perceives risk, whether from illness, public opinion, or unpredictability, it moves decisively. This is why William's role becomes even more critical in moments like these. Charles may be the symbol, the king, the one who carries the weight of history on his shoulders, but the institution is already preparing for the next phase. And in that phase, reliability, predictability, and public perception matter more than personal desire. Even for Charles, every public appearance now carries dual meaning: the visible representation of leadership and the internal signaling to the monarchy that succession is already being considered. Every smile, every handshake, every acknowledgement of William or other key figures is coded communication, reassurance, alignment, and preparation all wrapped into ritual. And while the public focuses on the ceremonial, the pomp, the headlines, the emotional narratives, the internal reality is far more clinical. Monarchies operate on preparation and continuity. The human desire to linger, to hope, to delay the inevitable is secondary. The institution does not grieve in the same way a family might. It anticipates, plans, and executes. Charles has spent his entire life waiting for the crown, yet the news of his condition forces a reckoning he may never have imagined. His vision, his ambitions, his plans for modernization, and even the personal satisfaction of influence are now measured not in decades, but in months. And the institution, always prioritizing survival over sentiment, has already begun to pivot. This duality, personal longing versus institutional necessity, is at the heart of the monarchy's drama. Charles embodies patience, loyalty, and endurance. Yet the moment he became king, he also became subject to forces beyond personal control. History, duty, perception, and timing. And now, those forces are moving faster than he can influence. The palace's announcement, careful and precise, was a reflection of this dual reality. Publicly, it invited sympathy and patience. Privately, it sent signals. The clock is running, decisions are being finalized, and continuity is non-negotiable. The words heartbreaking news were not simply a statement about health. They were a coded message to the family, the government, and the public. The time for waiting is over. The time for preparation has begun. And in the midst of all this, the family dynamics, the human element, cannot be ignored. William stands ready, embodying stability and continuity. Harry's absence signals a fracture in loyalty or, at the very least, a divergence from the institutional path. And, as always, acts as the bridge between human emotion and structural necessity, ensuring that the institution moves forward with clarity. Charles's lifetime of waiting may culminate in a reign shorter than anyone anticipated, and yet, that is precisely why the internal planning has accelerated. The monarchy cannot afford hesitation. Symbolism, sentiment, and emotion are secondary to survival, and every step, from appearances to private consultations, is calibrated to ensure that continuity is maintained, even as personal ambitions and long-held dreams are adjusted or abandoned. The chapter that follows will examine in detail the palace's language itself, how each carefully chosen word in their announcement, each omission, and each timing decision signals far more than is visible on the surface. We'll break down how the phrasing heartbreaking news became a pivot point, the subtle contradictions that revealed internal priorities, and why the message was as much about succession as it was about sympathy. Because understanding the words is understanding the plan. And the plan is already in motion. They said heartbreaking news, but they didn't say much else. That's what made it so unnerving. Because Buckingham Palace never communicates in half measures. Every word is deliberate, every pause intentional, and when something is left unsaid, that silence carries weight. Think about it. If a monarch were facing a routine health setback, the palace would have reassured the public immediately. Phrases like stable condition or under observation would dominate the headlines. Updates would be timed carefully, reassuring allies and citizens alike. But this wasn't a routine setback. The choice of heartbreaking news was deliberate. It was designed to signal gravity without revealing the full scope. So what can we infer from what was said, and importantly, what wasn't said? First, heartbreaking is rarely used lightly. In royal communications, it's almost always reserved for irreversible events, death, permanent incapacitation, or crises with profound emotional and historical significance. That the palace employed it here signals that Charles's condition is not minor. It signals that planning for succession must accelerate, and it signals that public expectation must be managed carefully. Next, consider what the statement avoided. There was no timeline, no medical detail, no attempt to minimize the severity. That absence is intentional. If the monarchy had wanted to soften concern, they would have included a hopeful note, an anticipated recovery window. But they did not. Silence, in this context, is louder than reassurance. It leaves room for speculation, but only speculation that aligns with institutional priorities. The crown must endure, the machinery of succession must function, and predictability must outweigh sentiment. There is a long tradition of carefully controlled messaging when it comes to royal health. Queen Elizabeth II, for example, rarely allowed updates on illness to reach the public unless absolutely necessary. When updates did appear, they were precise, neutral, and designed to maintain continuity. The same framework is in play here, but with an added layer, a sense of urgency. Heartbreaking is not neutral. It is emotional. It creates a pause. A moment for the public to absorb the reality that something serious is unfolding. Yet, behind the curtain, planning is anything but uncertain. This is where the duality of the situation becomes clear. The public sees uncertainty. The palace sees inevitability. While the public debates health, sympathy, and continuity, the institution is quietly enacting contingency plans. Succession conversations, role assignments, and public messaging strategies have already been initiated. And every detail, down to William's increasing visibility, reflects that planning. William's role is key. His appearances, measured and calm, signal readiness. There is no drama in his public actions, only assurance. He embodies continuity. He represents predictability to the institution, and that is what the crown prizes above all else. Every meeting, every handshake, every smile is not merely ceremonial. It is communication to the family, the government, and the public. I am here. I am ready. Continuity is assured. Contrast this with Harry. His absence is deafening. While William positions himself within the narrative, Harry's distance marks a clear break. Publicly, he is absent. Institutionally, he is unaccounted for. In moments like these, the crown cannot tolerate uncertainty. Emotional loyalty and personal autonomy, while admirable on a human level, do not replace institutional trust. And Harry, by stepping away from traditional roles, has removed himself from the calculations of continuity. Now consider Princess Anne. She has always been a stabilizing force. Her involvement here is no accident, and is the internal authority on clarity and protocol. She does not play for media attention. She does not soften truths for comfort. Her voice signals that ambiguity is no longer acceptable. When she steps in, it is to ensure that the machinery of succession remains unchallenged and uninterrupted. And in this context, her presence carries an unspoken message. William is not only ready, he is inevitable. The combination of Charles's condition, the palace's language, William's positioning, Harry's absence, and Anne's presence creates a pattern that is impossible to ignore. The institution is moving, and it is moving decisively. Every word, every omission, every visible action is calibrated to prepare the world and the family for the inevitability of succession. Yet for the public, this is only half the story. Headlines focus on the king's condition, public sentiment, and the heartbreaking framing. Few recognize the signals embedded in the subtext, a shift in visibility, a recalibration of trust, and a deliberate exclusion that signals internal consensus. The monarchy is operating on a level the public rarely sees, silent, deliberate, precise. And this brings us to the tension at the heart of the matter. The monarchy, as an institution, prioritizes survival. It rewards predictability and punishes deviation. It moves with precision and does not hesitate when necessary. Charles's health may be the trigger, but the underlying issue is not illness alone. It is readiness, reliability, and the unavoidable calculus of succession. In moments like this, the palace's messaging operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Publicly, it is compassionate and measured. Privately, it is strategic and deliberate. And only by reading between the lines can we see the full picture. The machinery of succession has already been activated, and the public is being prepped, slowly and deliberately, to accept the changes that are coming. The next chapter will explore exactly how succession operates within the monarchy, the mechanics, the rules, the internal deliberations, and why personal sentiment, even from sons and daughters, is secondary to institutional stability. We will see how the crown functions like a machine, unflinching, precise, and relentless, and why those who deviate from its expectations cannot be accommodated. Because while the public debates sympathy and speculation, The institution has already moved forward, and the consequences for those left out are far from theoretical. The crown does not wait for grief. It does not pause for tears. It does not negotiate with sentiment. Succession is a machine, precise and unyielding, governed by centuries of precedent, legal frameworks, and the cold arithmetic of continuity. And in moments like these, when the health of a monarch shifts from hypothetical concern to immediate reality, that machine begins to move, whether the public notices or not. Let's start with the basics. The line of succession is not just a list of names. It is a carefully structured system designed to preserve stability, continuity, and the appearance of legitimacy. Every move, every gesture, every public appearance of a potential heir is scrutinized, not for drama, not for applause, but for reliability. Reliability is everything. The institution cannot tolerate unpredictability, and this is where Charles's condition becomes the catalyst for action. While the words heartbreaking news captured headlines, they also triggered a series of internal processes. Meetings behind closed doors, consultations with advisors, government officials, and Commonwealth representatives, evaluations of who can step into responsibility immediately. Every contingency, every scenario, has been considered long before the public became aware. This is not overreaction. It is precision. The monarchy has survived wars, abdications, and personal scandals because it functions like a clockwork mechanism. Every gear, every cog, every lever is designed to ensure the system continues regardless of individual desires. The public sees a family, a father, sons, and daughters. The institution sees a series of roles that must be fulfilled without interruption. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Personal feelings are irrelevant in this calculation. Loyalty, love, and even remorse do not alter the chain of command. The crown does not ask, who deserves it most? It asks, who can preserve it? That distinction is what separates the monarchy from ordinary families. And when the machinery senses risk, whether from illness, uncertainty, or deviation from duty, it moves decisively. Consider Prince William. His role in the succession is not just a matter of birthright. It is a matter of institutional trust. He has demonstrated predictability, composure, and discretion over decades. He has absorbed scrutiny without breaking, handled public pressure without deviation, and maintained alignment with the crown's expectations. In the eyes of the institution, he is indispensable. He is the gear that turns reliably when called upon. Contrast this with Prince Harry. Harry's decisions, while understandable on a personal level, introduce uncertainty into the system. By stepping away from traditional roles, speaking openly about personal grievances, and challenging the institution publicly, he becomes unpredictable. That unpredictability is a liability. And in moments where the institution requires certainty, liabilities are set aside. Not because of malice, not because of punishment, but because survival demands it. Princess Anne's role in this context is critical and does not mediate sentiment. She does not seek public approval. She enforces clarity. Her interventions ensure that the machine of succession functions without disruption. When she signals alignment or preference, it is an operational decision, not a personal one. And in the current context, her involvement confirms that the machinery is moving toward William, with Harry outside its immediate considerations. The palace's messaging, carefully crafted and measured, reflects this reality. Publicly, it appears empathetic, cautious, and restrained. Privately, it is precise, decisive, and inevitable. The public hears words like heartbreaking news and focuses on emotional resonance. The institution focuses on contingency, positioning, and execution. These dual narratives coexist intentionally, creating the perception of balance while ensuring operational clarity. Every appearance of William, every absence of Harry, every carefully worded statement by Charles or Anne is a signal. They communicate readiness, trust, and inevitability. The machinery of succession is already turning, and the public narrative is merely catching up. Now, let's address an uncomfortable reality. Because succession is mechanical, personal emotions are frequently collateral damage. Fathers grieve differently than institutions. Sons are measured not by love, but by reliability. Even siblings can become irrelevant if they fail to align with institutional priorities. And yet, for the public, this is almost impossible to see. We interpret the monarchy as a family first and an institution second. But when the stakes involve survival and continuity, the institution always prevails. This mechanical approach explains why the announcement of Charles's condition, combined with William's increasing visibility and Harry's absence, is more than mere coincidence. It is a deliberate orchestration of signals to internal and external audiences. The system is already prioritizing who can perform under pressure, who can be counted upon, and who can embody stability. Consider the broader implications. Succession isn't just about the next king or queen. It affects global perception, governmental operations, financial markets, and diplomatic confidence. A delayed decision, public uncertainty, or misalignment within the family could ripple across nations. That is why the crown cannot pause for emotion. The stakes are far too high. And yet, within this mechanical framework, humans remain. Charles, William, Harry, and all operate under personal pressures, emotional histories, and familial bonds. These forces intersect with the machine, creating tension. Human unpredictability threatens the system, and when it occurs, it must either be managed or removed. This is the delicate balance the palace navigates daily, maintaining appearances while ensuring the gears of succession continue to turn without interruption. This chapter leads directly to the next, Prince William, the heir who has been quietly positioned over decades as the embodiment of stability and reliability. We will examine how his public and private actions align perfectly with the institutional requirements of the monarchy, why his rise was inevitable, and why, in the context of Charles's condition, his position has become unassailable. But what comes next will reveal the cost of predictability. The human stories, the relationships, and the emotional consequences for those who cannot or will not conform to the machine. And those costs, though invisible to most, are profound. Prince William didn't have to shout. He didn't have to stage grand entrances or deliver dramatic speeches. His visibility, subtle and calculated, has always been his signature. And now, in the wake of King Charles's health concerns, that signature has taken on new weight. Every public appearance, every measured statement, every perfectly timed photograph is a signal. Continuity is here, reliability is assured, and the future of the crown is secure. William's preparation for kingship didn't begin yesterday. It began decades ago, in the quiet, behind-the-scenes routines that the public rarely sees. His life was structured around observation, absorption, and the development of composure. He learned early that every action, even a small gesture, carries significance. A smile at the right moment reassures the public. A pause at the right event signals deference to tradition. A handshake conveys authority without arrogance. He internalized this silently, methodically, over decades of scrutiny. Contrast this with the narrative that often dominates media coverage. Stories tend to highlight drama, controversy, or rebellion. William, however, has mastered the art of invisible discipline. He demonstrates loyalty without spectacle, presence without grandstanding, and alignment without ostentation. This is not charisma alone. It is training, patience, and a deep understanding of the machinery he is destined to inherit. Now, consider the timing. King Charles's health concerns, the palace's measured announcement, and the subtle repositioning of William are not coincidences. These moves are the culmination of long-term planning. William has been visible in ways that are deliberate, not performative. Each appearance is a message to the public, the family, and the institution. He is ready, capable, and indispensable. But what does readiness mean in practical terms? It's more than ceremony or public appearances. Readiness involves understanding the internal dynamics of the monarchy. The legal, political, and symbolic responsibilities that cannot be outsourced or ignored. William has been trained to navigate these waters, often in silence, observing how decisions are made, how the institution responds to pressure, and how crises are managed. This institutional fluency is invisible to the public but invaluable in moments of uncertainty. The public, naturally, interprets succession emotionally. They see a father, a son, and a brother. They hope for fairness, reconciliation, or family unity. But the monarchy is not governed by sentiment. It is governed by reliability. and William has demonstrated, repeatedly, that he can be counted on. He embodies continuity in a way that cannot be challenged, even by blood ties. Contrast this with Harry, whose unpredictability, independent choices, and public criticisms mark him as a risk to the system. Harry's absence in the current narrative. From public appearances, ceremonial roles, and institutional discussions, is not oversight. It is deliberate. The monarchy cannot tolerate uncertainty when the machinery of succession is activated. William's reliability is not just desirable, it is essential. Princess and subtle involvement underscores this further. She ensures that the machinery functions without disruption. Her presence signals to the family, the institution, and the public that the succession is orderly. When Anne aligns herself with William's visibility, it is a confirmation that the internal consensus supports him. It is the institutional stamp of inevitability. But there is more to this than logistics. William represents a model of predictability that the monarchy can project to the world. Governments, Commonwealth nations, financial institutions, and international allies all watch these cues closely. Stability is communicated not just through words, but through behavior, presence, and alignment. William embodies this stability in a way that reassures both internal and external audiences. And yet, beneath the calculated public veneer, the personal stakes are enormous. William is not only stepping into his institutional role, he is navigating complex family dynamics. The absence of Harry, the aging of Charles, and the weight of history all create pressure that is as emotional as it is operational. Every smile, every speech, every engagement is an exercise in maintaining composure while reinforcing continuity. This is the delicate balance that William has mastered, being visible enough to signal readiness, restrained enough to avoid overshadowing, and disciplined enough to maintain trust with the institution. Every step he takes is measured, every gesture deliberate, every decision informed by the dual pressures of family and monarchy. The next chapter will explore Harry's absence in detail, the personal, public, and institutional consequences of stepping outside the predictable path. We will examine why deviation from the expected role is treated not as a personal choice, but as an operational liability, and why Harry's current position leaves him outside the machinery of succession. An intention with the institution that once defined his life. But what comes next will reveal the human cost of predictability and the emotional consequences for those who are excluded from the Crown's carefully calibrated plan. Prince Harry's absence in the current narrative isn't accidental. It isn't temporary. It isn't a reflection of oversight or miscommunication. It is deliberate. A product of the institution's unwillingness to accommodate unpredictability in times of critical transition. And the cost of that exclusion is both personal and symbolic. Think back to Harry's choices over the past decade. Stepping back from official duties. Speaking publicly about private family struggles. Pursuing an independent path outside the traditional confines of the monarchy. Each of these actions, while understandable from a human perspective, signals something the institution cannot tolerate: uncertainty. Reliability, predictability, and alignment with the system are non-negotiable. Harry's choices, however well-intentioned, made him a variable the Crown cannot control. This isn't a question of morality or fairness. It isn't about who loves the family more or who behaves better. Institutions like the monarchy do not operate on sentiment. They operate on survival. And when the machinery senses instability, whether through health crises, succession ambiguity, or behavioral deviation, it acts decisively to preserve continuity. Harry, despite being a blood prince, has positioned himself outside the immediate operational flow. He has chosen transparency over secrecy, autonomy over obedience, and personal fulfillment over duty. These are admirable qualities in many contexts, but in the context of succession planning during a period of uncertainty, they are liabilities. The institution cannot rely on unpredictability, regardless of love or loyalty. Meanwhile, William has remained consistently aligned with the Crown's expectations. His composure, discretion, and predictability render him the heir the institution can trust. Every public appearance reinforces this trust. Every absence of drama communicates readiness. The contrast between the brothers is stark, and it has profound implications for succession and institutional stability. But Harry's exclusion is not only operational, it is deeply human. The tension between personal desire and institutional expectation is at the heart of his story. He has chosen authenticity, but authenticity comes at a cost. The machinery of the monarchy is unforgiving toward deviation, and the consequences are personal. Alienation, exclusion, and diminished influence in matters that directly affect his family and legacy. And yet, there is a paradox. While Harry's choices remove him from the operational flow of succession, they elevate him in the public imagination. To the world, he is courageous, outspoken, and principled. To the monarchy, he is unpredictable, potentially destabilizing, and outside the framework of trust. This duality underscores the difference between public perception and institutional reality, a gap that has defined much of Harry's adult life. Consider also the impact on relationships. Charles, William, and are bound by the institution's demands, which prioritize continuity above emotion. Harry's choices, however, introduce variables the crown cannot easily integrate. His absence is not just symbolic, it is functional. It signals that the machinery will operate without him, that continuity is not contingent on reconciliation, and that predictability trumps personal history. Princess Anne's role becomes critical here as well. By reinforcing William's visibility and reliability, she effectively codifies Harry's absence. She does not vilify him. She does not dramatize the situation. She ensures the institution functions smoothly despite personal fractures. Her intervention highlights the uncomfortable truth. Loyalty is measured by alignment with the system, not by love or lineage. And so, the consequences of unpredictability are clear. The public may debate morality, fairness, and family loyalty, but the monarchy operates on a different calculus. It values predictability above all. It prioritizes operational continuity over personal grievance. And in moments of transition, like the one triggered by King Charles's health, these principles are enforced decisively. This chapter sets the stage for understanding why the succession is already leaning decisively toward William. It is not a commentary on affection or family bonds. It is a structural decision. Reliability is rewarded. Unpredictability is excluded. The stakes are too high to risk uncertainty, even for blood relatives. The next chapter will examine the subtle signals in the public sphere that reinforce this shift: coordinated appearances, carefully timed statements, and deliberate omissions.